This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, excellent morning all. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining the bi-weekly door heat exchanger meeting. Before we start getting into details, I just wanted to highlight the items we wanted to go over. The first item is we had the OCP virtual summit around 2 weeks ago. Definitely want to solicit any feedback that the community members may have on their thoughts post-summit. I have finally gone ahead and rolled over all the updates to the online document. So one thing I'd like to do, but maybe not spend too much time on, is quickly highlight changes to all the major sections. The answers that have been the answers that have been added to the questions that are in the online Google Doc. I think this involves DC environmental conditions, water quality requirements. I've also updated the ceiling of rack airflow section based on the IEC spec with some general guidance. It's not very detailed, but I think the intention is to keep it is to sort of bring it to the attention of the rack integrators and give them some thoughts on what could potentially go wrong. We also have an updated environmental and regulation section based on some feedback I received from our internal manufacturing and quality team. I've also reached out to the DCF group to maybe give some guidance on the airside conditions. I've updated that section as well. I know before, after the last meeting, Mike Thompson had sent the redfish mockup along with some documentation over to Jeff Otter and John as well. I see that Jeff Otter is on the call, so that's awesome. I'll definitely leave some time to so we can review that. And then finally, just wanted to discuss release of the online specification for review. I think we are at a pretty good point where there's a lot of material that's already in there. And we can definitely start getting feedback from not only the community but also the other groups that can help us review the documentation, and then hopefully pretty soon we can send it over to the incubation committee to get their feedback on the same. So very quickly to get started on the topics, the first one is the OCP virtual summit. Are there any post-summit thoughts from the community that we'd like to capture here, and maybe forward to the OCP leadership team in general? Anyone? Okay, I guess there are no comments.
Certainly kept us busy for a couple days.
Yeah, it was pretty jam-packed, and there was a lot of material to go over. But yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I've provided feedback already, but yeah, the fact that they ran all those things back to back nonstop for what 6 or 8 hours a day. It's like, guys, I know it's virtual, but we still need to take breaks.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay.
I think all the material was pretty good. I think the video really helps. Something that I can go back and watch it again, and
oh yeah.
So I thought it was pretty good summit, and then I think all the material was well prepared. Somehow I like the virtual versus over the in person. Although I missed the in person too.
Yeah, the software did do a good job of, you know, of making all the material available and making it easy to get to, and you know that you could go look at the recordings very quickly after the event. But I do wish that it had more of an audio conference, you know, ability to ask for Q&A rather than the typing stuff in chat. And that was, but you know,
Yeah, that one I agree.
I don't fault them for anything they did, because I know they had to scramble to get all that organized. So yeah, that software was to be looked like, you know, I told folks I was waiting for the GeoCities and the AOL icons to pop up on that thing, but you know, they got what they got in short order. So given that, I'll give them lots of leeway.
Yeah, I think I agree that the if the Q&A was more interactive, I think if everyone can call in and ask a Q&A verbally, I think that was even better.
Yep.
But I think the content and material video was pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that I agree with Jeff, right? That with the limited amount of time, they put this together pretty well, right? Yeah, I guess with chat-based Q&A and voice-based Q&A, it goes both ways, right? I guess chat-based Q&A made it easier to organize the Q&A session so that the presenters could sort of they would have had control on the rate at which questions were answered. I think with voice-based Q&A, there would have to be a sort of staging system where, you know, you make sure that people are not talking on top of each other, and it can be pretty effective too. But I agree, yeah, voice-based Q&A would have made it a lot more personal, I guess, yeah. Awesome. That's some really good feedback. We'll be sure to pass that on. If there's nothing else, we'll move over to the next section, which is reviewing the latest updates to the specification. I'm assuming everyone can see my screen. I've been taking notes already. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right, excellent. So in some cases, I've already gone ahead and made changes and resolved questions that are already in place. I think we're definitely beyond revision 0.2, but let's get into it. We've also had much better organization of, I think the formatting needs to be cleaned up a little bit more, but I think in terms of raw content, we are pretty good. I think the scope hasn't changed, potential applications haven't changed. I think they're still fairly well covered. I think we had a question, Mike, I think from you about, you know, why we're using the term CDU here. So I think we added some text in here saying CDU, coolant distribution unit, saying term used in a general sense here. I think we understand that you wouldn't need a plate heat exchanger in this case, right? In the closed loop case, you would just need just the pump and the filtration and the reservoir. So I think we acknowledge that. So we just added this text in here. If this makes sense, I'll go ahead and assume that this is resolved and move forward to the next section. Does that sound good?
Maybe in a very general way. I mean, if we see UL and IEC or whatever norm there or standards, they are usually having a terms section which clearly defines what each term means. And maybe this is something we should add to it as well, because different people could understand different things for a CDU.
Okay, so Stefan, what you're saying is we should have a separate section that just has the different acronyms, and we can maybe in that section give a detailed description of what we mean by that?
Exactly.
Okay.
Also, what means liquid to air, what is air assisted, and so on. Basically, just a section where we populate all the terms and basically define what do we, so just to form a common base for understanding that we all speak the same language.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do that, but in the meantime, I'll assume this one is resolved. All right. And then in physical specifications, I don't think there were any major questions apart from the depth of 1 foot. To Mike's comment over here, we've gone ahead and made it preferred depth, right? So means that it's not a hard requirement. I think the hard requirement is the ability to swing open the doors by 90 degrees based on a distance of about 1200 millimeters, which is based on the European standard of what the tile sizing is. So Mike, I'm going to go ahead and say this is resolved as well based on that. So any comments or questions on that?
Maybe in this section just kind of note the hard standard is mentioned in section whatever or figure blah blah, just to make it clear.
Sure. Okay, we'll do that.
For the preferred depth,
yeah. So we just said preferred over here, not.
Yeah.
I think before it was maximum required depth. So we just changed that to preferred. So I think it's fairly well understood. Over here in this section, we've gone ahead and added both the weight limitations for both OpenRack V2 and OpenRack V3. We've also gone ahead and added the preferred weight of door with fluid volume should be less than or equal to 100 kilograms, but the maximum requirement is 150. So, people understand what's the preferred weight, but, if you can't meet that, there's, the maximum requirement as well. So I think that gets covered as well. I think we're good to resolve this. I don't think there were any major changes in these sections. Over here on airside conditions, I've gone ahead and updated this to make it more generic. So I believe these conditions cover, these airside supply conditions cover a lot of what the hyperscalers do with energy efficient air cooling designs. So I've just gone ahead and added this in here. Like I said, in the introduction, I've also reached out to Brevin, who is still leading the data center facilities group under OCP, to get his thoughts on this as well. If they have a spec that we can align with, then we can make sure that all of this is sort of harmonized across OCP. But I think this serves pretty well based on what our understanding is right now. So this has been a change that's been made. I think on the water side, all the changes that we discussed in the offline document have been rolled over. So the first one is it's recommended not to drop below 16 degrees to avoid excessive condensation. A lot of people call that out in the document, so that change has been made. We do state that it's within the W1 class, but that doesn't mean that you need to control a very short range of 16 to 17 degrees. All it means is just defining a minimum requirement. I also suggest to remove non-condensing operation is a must. I think all we can do is provide guidance on how to minimize condensation. I think beyond that, it's more about how the facility operates, right? And it's not so much within the control of the door heat exchanger itself. So that's why, and this is something that's been called out, right, even originally. So not only in this section is there a recommendation on the minimum facility supply temperature for the coolant, but also in the serviceability section, I've called it out again. So the guidance has been called out multiple times, but I believe we can remove this bullet point now since we've called that out. So I'm going to mark this as resolved and remove this section. Okay. I think otherwise, Stefan, a lot of what was described over here, we added the operating pressure. I think this is harmonized across the different OCP teams, so we're good. And also the water quality requirements and the other standards that you suggested. So yeah, I think the water side section also is looking pretty good. Performance and metrology, like I said, offline document, we defined this like a few months ago, so I've just gone ahead and integrated it. I think this is fairly comprehensive, especially in terms of the efficiency and the airside pressure drop for a passive heat exchanger. So I think we're good from that standpoint. And the rest of these sections that we had before, actually all of the material that's in here has been taken and sort of discussed and aligned on in the previous section. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all these previous comments because they're already covered in this section up here. So that's performance and metrology. Monitoring and control is basically based on what we've been discussing with regards to redfish. You know, what's required, what is optional, also in terms of controls and alarms. Same thing for differentiated between a passive door and then additional sensors or additional types of control based on an active design. We do highlight that we want to be redfish compliant. We do have a table that highlights the parameters in the header section in terms of having manufacturer information and so on and so forth. And we do have a line that says redfish schema and reference documentation are currently TBD. So whenever we have feedback from Jeff and John, about those different areas and the mock-up, we can definitely get started. Definitely update this line in here to sort of link to that documentation. I guess it'll be separate. Separate files will be available, based on that. And then the previous section is fairly bare bones, but once again has already been taken care of in the above section. So I'll go ahead and remove that. We have a serviceability section that's stayed fairly standard. Once again, like I said, we once again highlight the guidance to maintain a minimum coolant supply temperature to avoid excessive condensation. And also it's recommended to have a drip tray to sort of accommodate any condensation that may happen, especially useful when there are data centers that don't have a raised floor or a runoff area. I think otherwise this section is fairly well defined. Reliability and quality, the pressure leak testing, I don't think this has changed, but once again, thanks to Stefan for all this input. One thing I did want to touch up on is the sealing of in-rack airflow. So I've gone ahead and highlighted that for an IT rack employing a door heat exchanger, the quality of airflow sealing, we highlight the IAC 62610-6 standard that's been recently updated in 2020. I say that we do say that the standard helps define metrics for airflow recirculation and bypass, as well as how that can be measured. And we do say that this should serve as a guidance for rack integrators. We do highlight we want to keep both recirculation and bypass ratios to a minimum, and just highlight a couple of points to take note of, which is both the in-rack sealing is important as well as the sealing of the door heat exchanger frame to the rack. And that's basically what's highlighted in these 2 bullet points. It says, installation of a rear-mounted door heat exchanger should not impact subrack or chassis inlet temperatures. When employing a passive door heat exchanger, added impedance should be understood to not severely impact recirculation. This could be addressed with adequate in-rack sealing. And then the other point is, once again, a door heat exchanger solution to avoid unnecessary rack level airflow bypass. The fan control logic should be appropriately tuned to ensure airflow is efficiently used or prioritized through the IT chassis. And then once again, in-rack sealing is critical here. So I feel like this is a fairly good summary guidance as to which standard to refer to, but also, highlighting that the need to keep recirculation and bypass ratios to a minimum, and then some general guidance in here. So I feel like this area, covers the section on sealing fairly well. But if there are any comments over here, I'd be happy to capture any.
I think this is fine.
Okay. And then once again, we had these comments that were made previously that were significantly expanded upon in this section. So I'll go ahead and remove all the struck out points. Environmental and regulations, like I said, this is feedback I received from my manufacturing quality engineering colleague. So there's a lot of information in here. Shock and vibe, environmental, storage, transportation, contamination, regulations and compliance, and then labels and marking. And I think that rounds out the document fairly well. So yeah, so when you guys do have a chance, please have a look at the document. Go ahead and clean it up a little bit more, I guess, based on our discussion. But that's what I wanted to cover, at least in terms of the specification. Like I said, it's come along fairly well, and I think it's time to sort of open up the document for review, so that we can move to submitting it to the incubation committee, and get this formally published in due time. So, okay. Any other comments on the spec before we move on to the next topic? I'll just give a couple of minutes over here just to make sure that we capture everything. Okay. Yeah, so awesome. I really want to call out a lot of the help that, in particular, Stefan and Mike have helped put this together, put sections of this together fairly significantly. So really appreciate, the help from the community members, almost like partners in this case. Really appreciate that. So let's move on to the next topic. So in terms of redfish definitions and latest updates, once again, I see Jeff on the call and Mike. Mike, I leave the stage open to you. Are there any things we want to capture particularly during today's call?
Mike, are you there? You might be on another mute, maybe.
Yeah,
No,
we can't hear you for some reason.
He's trying his mic now. Maybe.
Working now?
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Okay, so
Excellent.
I have this problem with this microphone all the time. The DTMF has expressed interest in the work that we're doing on this, so it's nice to have their support. And I'm also working with a PicMig group to do something that's virtually identical to this. And that group is quite active right now. So I will take some of the recommendations that they have for the redfish implementation and roll that back into the work that we've done here. And then I'll update that and send that off to Jeff and John for more comment. Jeff can probably speak to what the procedure should probably be to move ahead on this.
Yeah, and Mike, thanks for for sending that stuff, because it was very interesting, and I've been looking at some CDU pieces here internally at HPE, and also there's a number of folks that are interested in, you said the picnic guys are getting interesting. But just as a lot of the general topics that you're trying to cover here are some larger topics in for the industry that we want to cover, and that's things like the way that alarms are handled and silenced, and we want to coalesce some of that with some of the other existing specs. So we don't want to try to I want to work with the things that are out there, because all we're doing is providing a JSON interface and an API for this. So there's lots of procedural things that exist in these systems. So I don't want to try to reinvent those, and certainly want to make them work with known best practices. And what I told Michael was that the work that he had done so far was interesting, and I liked it a lot. So I don't want to say interesting as interesting, but just to make sure that we have like clear copyright in these things, I'd asked Michael if he can, and if he's already working with the Picnic guys on that stuff, if they can send it to the DMTF through their feedback portal, since they already have the Alliance relationship stuff, or if you just created those things, if you can just send that, is really the effector model that you had come up with, and I don't think there's anything intellectual property there really, but just to make sure that we have clear copyright, we want to get that through the proper channel. So it's really just taking that and sending it to an email through the DMTF feedback portal link that I gave you, and I can send that to you again if you need it. But if you can do that, and so that you get it to me through that channel, I'm going to take that and work with the data center infrastructure task force within the DMTF to really kind of put that back out, take some of my own thoughts and incorporate them, and then I want to throw that stuff back out into the public as a work in progress, so that we can keep this conversation going in a lot of in the various places where they're happening, and try to get some tighter feedback loops here, so that we can work this stuff through. So I have to go check. I don't think that HPE is I have to check our membership in Picnic, because if I can join there, I will do that. Because obviously if there's stuff going on, it'll be much quicker to cycle this stuff through.
Some of the things that we've been working on in the PicMig side is the configuration versus operation
Right.
of the effectors and the PID loops and things, and how you get into the configuration mode, what you can change in a configuration mode, and in the operational mode, what kind of configuration things are exposed or are not. And we're trying to put a little bit of security and preventing inadvertent configuration changes versus operational changes.
Right.
Things like you should be able to have a generic effector, and it may end up being like the same firmware that's running on a CDU controller will work for quite a number of different units. And you should be able to go into a configuration phase of this and say, this has got 1 pump or 3 pumps, or has this specific feature or not, or you have PWM versus a voltage for controlling the speed of a pump. But in an operational state, you should be able to control the speed of the pump, but you shouldn't be able to fiddle with the configuration variables for how you control the speed of a pump. So we're trying to break out the operational state versus the configuration state on this, and working right now and trying to figure out how you go from one state to another, and potentially put some security restrictions or something like that on there.
So when you said configuration state in terms of actually like, oh, this thing's a pump, I have two of them, and those kind of things, is that actually, I mean, is this are these control units that flexible when they're delivered to the end user, or is this something that happens kind of at manufacture time or deployment
We're
time?
thinking that this might be an integration level thing, that if there's multiple interfaces into a CDU, that you might want to disable Modbus or interface or something like that. And there might be some setup kind of things that you would do when you actually install the CDU. So there may actually be 3 levels to this. So there may be the manufacturer's configuration things, and that may be something that's out of scope for Redfish entirely. You can see the values, but you can't change the values. There may be other values that are installation related values. So things like physical location and asset tag and things like that, that in an operational state you wouldn't really want somebody to fiddle with.
Right.
So how do you prevent somebody when they're running in an operational state from fiddling with things like an asset tag? And just how do you get into a mode on this where you can change the asset tag? So we're kind of working through that right now.
Okay, yeah, I think I think we can help with some of that, because those are not uncommon kinds of questions, right? So, so the part that I was taking back was was this concept of the effector and having the being able to use that as a control that could be tied to a sensor reading, and being able to make that so that in the normal operational sense, a customer can, or a user of the interface can just pull the data and get the controls with the sensor readings together, so that you can, you have a kind of a clear set of data without all of that, for lack of a better word, all the metadata that describes the max readings and the ranges and the thresholds and all the rest of the stuff. So we had a concept that we did for our sensor model where you can make a copy of data elsewhere in the model, but you only produce an excerpt of it, so that you get a little bit of the data, the important stuff. For sensor, it's usually just the reading.
So the operational state may be an excerpt of the complete configuration state.
Exactly. And so and that's why I'm kind of in a hurry and poking on you to get that effector model through. So because I've already got I've already adapted it to this model of using the same concept that we did for sensor, and actually have kind of a double flow through, if you will, or a pass through of, hey, let me take an excerpt of an effector, so that'll show you what here's where your knob is, right? So here's your set point, but I can also pull in the values of the sensors that it's associated with and provide that. And so now you get an operational view that's just, here's the knob and here's the resulting values that come from that, without all the gory detail. And then if you want gory detail, click here, and that's where you move on the operational into that configuration or the static details page.
Yep. Now, another thing on the operationals versus configuration is on rear door coolers and in-row coolers. Generally, the controller that's inside of them has lots of different mechanisms for managing the water flow and the airflow. And you can do it by water temperature differential, air differential temperature, air pressure, and usually the controllers inside of them are capable of lots of these. So the manufacturer will enable all of those capabilities. And there may actually be other capabilities that the controller has firmware for, but are not enabled on a particular rear door cooler. But when the rear door cooler is installed, the customer has a particular idea of how he wants to manage the water flow and the airflow. So he would go into the configuration state and say, I want to manage this by differential water temperature.
Mhm.
And then when you exit out of the configuration state into the operational state, then I guess we would see the excerpt of this, which would not show you all of the possible states, but it might show you the current control state.
Yeah.
Plus, as you said, the sensor that's being used to control this, and in this case, it might actually be. We're actually coming up with virtual sensors, which is another thing that we talked about. So if you wanted to do a differential temperature as the input to this, you could actually have input water temperature, output water temperature, and create a virtual differential temperature sensor.
Yep. Yep. And we have some of those concepts for exactly that reason. So you may want to synthesize some of these numbers because people want to be able to pull those and create pretty pictures and graphs over time. So having it all in consistent forms, it allows for that. So and that's why we think it's really interesting and important to have all these sort of reading things and the sensors and the effectors modeled the same way, so that a generic piece of monitoring software could literally just start pulling all this data and making graphs and stuff and reports out of it without having to be vendor or even topic specific.
Yep.
Now,
the other thing we're working on right now is interlocks, so that you can have multiple pieces of equipment working with each other.
Yes.
So that if you had a large cabinet that had, say, 2 rear door coolers in it, that you could tie the door open switch to the fan speed for both of the rear door coolers.
And I have some ideas for how to do that, because we could actually, what we did in the stuff for user defined jobs, which is a totally different concept that we're talking about here, but we have a concept where you can specify here's the URI and here's the payload to send. And so when this happens, or when you want to execute this job, you literally just provide, here's the redfish command to run. And so I'm thinking we could use that same concept here, and to say that, hey, if this threshold is passed or this condition occurs, then do a patch on this value to this, and actually provide that in the resource, so you can a user could configure that if it's not a predefined action that we could define in the spec, which obviously is easier to do for users. But,
yeah.
But
we were actually looking at doing it a little bit lower level than that, so that the controller might have multiple digital I/O pins on it, and if you chose to, at installation time, you could wire a micro switch to and mount it on the door.
Right.
And then you would go into the configuration mode, say potentially for the fan speed effector, and you would say that there's an interlock on this particular effector, and if this interlock goes to the true condition, then turn the fans off.
Yep, and we can do that too.
Mike, I guess a couple of areas that we may have previously brought to Jeff's attention was also, for example, I guess we just talked about differential pressure, but differential pressure can have different units depending on the medium that you are measuring, right? Like, for example, measuring airside differential pressure, pascals is more than enough. But when you start looking at differential pressure in terms of a water-based or a liquidous coolant, right, then you suddenly find yourselves in this sort of kilopascal region. And I'm not sure if that's still a concern here, but that was something that was previously brought to the attention, right, to see if if there's anything within the DMTF that can help address that. And I think another one was, the treatment of binary alarms such as door open, door closed, and like smoke detection or leak detection, right? It's either a 1 or a 0, right? So I'm just curious, right? Is that something that's still being tracked, or is that a non-issue based on all the progress that's been made in the past few months?
So two things. I'm looking here to see where the because the pressure and I'm looking and I'm the document I have up here is not. We have pressure and we have barometric pressure. So I think we may have. I'll have to look to see if we had clarified to make sure that since we have a barometric pressure. I need to look at some of the deeper descriptions here. Yeah. So we can add another reading type. If we need another, to differentiate different types of pressure readings or different units. So we can do that. That's super easy. So if I don't have that in there already, then we can do that. And that won't take any time at all. The things about what are usually called discrete sensors, or it's usually those dry contact things that get configured. And again, I think this is probably one of those areas that you talk about the configuration versus the operation. And so configuration wise, yeah, I think we need to have something there. But when we've got into these to these discrete sensors, what we've tried to do in Redfish is abstract away to the and this is again trying to be an application, an API and for users. And so you don't see a contact open, contact close kind of things in the model. Because we don't want to do that. We want to put the functionality there, so you would actually get like a door, door open, door closed, or a state. It would be called out very explicitly. And so so in that, back to that kind of configuration mode, if you go set up a door switch, then there'll be some property in the in the unit that will have a door status of open or closed or something like that. So it would actually surface those as defined features, not as dry contact number 2 is open or closed. And so that's a different approach than folks are used to in the definition of this. So it takes a little bit of us educating folks as to why that's a goodness, but the end users love that. Because now they don't have to try to make heads or tails of the binary data, and so that's the kind of approach we'll take, and is to add that functionality on the operational models. And so basically, if you have one of those configures, then it just shows up, and if you don't have one, then it's just not there. And then figure out how to do this on the configuration side to say, hey, I've got some number of inputs, and those are mapped to some functionality.
And you probably also have the ability to name the input.
Right. Oh yeah. Naming the inputs that stuff's easy.
Right.
That's
so you would go in and configure input number 1 to a normally open condition and name it as door open or door closed or something like that. And then when you go into the operational state, you don't really see the micro switch. All you see is the door state.
Exactly.
Okay, seems like that's been addressed. That's awesome. Thanks. I guess then moving on to the point about the timeline for release of the online specification. I guess what is currently available, what is currently in the document is good enough to go ahead as a review, so that it's not dependent so much on the schema and the files that need to be contributed. But I was just curious to know, it seems like there are lots of ongoing discussions with regards to these Redfish definitions and the mockup and all these features that need to be implemented. I was just curious to know, like, is there a general sense, I guess, of what that timeline would be like? And I guess Mike was saying maybe Jeff can help us understand that. What's the usual timeline for the necessary due process that takes place with such kind of submissions, I guess?
Yeah, it's almost always driven by how much participation we get in these efforts from subject matter experts. So I'm happy to help with all of the with all the schema writing and all the editorial and procedural stuff to get the stuff through. DMTF has a very light touch process now for getting the stuff turned around and standardized. I mean, if the group, if everyone kind of shakes, nods their head and says, yeah, it's good to go. Once we start the approval process, I mean, it can become a standard, just depending on, plus or minus a few weeks because of the way the calendars align. But it's really about 45 days if you attempt to get things done to align the calendar correctly. It can be as short as 45 days. And then we can also publish stuff that's that's going through that process as a work in progress, so it can be made effectively public in about 2 weeks. So as a point of history, I mean, we did the power distribution unit models. Those took about it was about 18 months. Just because there just was not a lot of participation. I was doing a lot of the lifting on that, so trying to get the number of subject matter experts to kind of go through and nod on that, it took a long time to get the feedback. So I'm hoping we can do something in a much shorter time. I would love to see at least a work in progress of this stuff put out here in the summer. And to maybe put a stake in the ground and say, can we get a 1.0 done before the end of the year on this stuff. And so to help with that, what we've done before is we will send out these work in progress things, and we actually crafted up a white paper for the power distribution unit that had a little bit of the explanation, but then just had the schemas as a human readable document put together. And so that became an avenue for for normal folks to be able to give feedback to make sure that the data makes sense and the definitions look right. But we can certainly take this stuff up, and I say getting more feedback is what drives this. But I have a group that meets every week on the data center management topics. And so we're working on UPS models now, but this can become top of mind as well.
Okay, awesome.
But I guess, sorry, what I would suggest from what we've done with some of the other groups with OCP is I would if you keep your you keep your doors or your spec to say use Redfish and follow the things in some we can point to another document, and we can create a document that looks like that power distribution white paper. So it would contain all of the schemas, and then we can make statements about what things are required and recommended and so forth. So that can all be done, and a lot of that can be generated. That text can be generated automatically. Because I can pull it in, it gets pulled in from a doc generator from the schema files, and so we can produce one of those with very little effort, and so that can become becomes a CDU management spec, or just a white paper. It depends on how you want to do it. But my guess, I generally like to see those things done as separate specs from a lot of the kind of the product definition things, because you've got a very different audience, and one of them may be moving at a much different pace than the other, right? So
fair enough. Yeah. I think that's a fair point. I think we already have some text in the specification I went over previously that says we definitely want to align with Redfish, and then here's a link to just generic information on Redfish, because a lot of people who read the document may not be aware, right?
Right.
And I also agree that maybe having a white paper that's more I'm going to say human readable, but I guess for the normal audience, that might be something for them to look at, because they may not necessarily be interested in reviewing the JSON files or so on and so forth. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Let
but
me,
I guess to that point with regards to the white paper, I know Mike had said previously that there was a tool that would take the the coded portion and then sort of generate a sort of human readable explanation of what the different sections do. Is that what
yes.
you're referring to when you say white paper?
Yeah, let me pull up. I'm going to send you. I'm going to put a link in the chat here. Let me find the document. White papers. There it is. Okay. Where's the? Oh, there's the chat. If you want to pull this up, so this will be pull up a PDF.
Okay, let me click on that. That should. I don't know why it always goes to Safari for some reason. Anyway,
so this document, so I wrote this, so credit and blame. So this page here, that forward, that was kind of boilerplate text I took from some of our other documents, so not a lot there. I mean, the forward, okay, new paragraph that says what this is. The rest of that page was kind of boilerplate that I grabbed from our other documents. And if you go down to the next page, and so this is now, so this is all text that I wrote up to describe, what you're looking at and kind of what the, what the various pieces of this model are. This is for a power distribution unit. And so if you just kind of scroll down the next couple, 2-3 pages, so that's all new stuff. So there's a diagram I grabbed from my PowerPoint. And again, try to get something done quickly. So this was like, it obviously changes style. And I think if you go one more page, that's again more explanation, and that's it. Okay, so now I'm starting on this page. Everything from here for the next I don't know how many pages is, next 80 pages probably. This is all 100% automatically generated from the schema files. So there is no human involvement here. So that's and so again, when we say human readable, yeah, that's what's in the JSON payloads, but those are all the descriptions, that there's there's examples and so on and so forth. But all that is all pulled in by a documentation generator. So it's like a giant, it's like a mail merge, right? So I've got this, this front material is all written by prose written by humans, and then the rest of it is was schema text extracted from the specified schema files. Yeah, so the first 10 pages took me many hours to craft up enough of it, and then the next 80 pages is about 2 minutes of doc generator.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it seems like even some portions of these first 10 pages are, like you said, boilerplate, or would be common irrespective of the topic. And I guess when you really start describing the actual components, I think that's where most of the heavy lifting is, if you want to call it that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and the tool that does this is open source, so it's available too. So anybody can go create one of these, and I'm more than happy to show folks if they want to take stabs at this kind of stuff. So I mean, this can be produced in the and this one has that redfish and DMT up, but there's nothing in that's all pulled as part of the input file. So this doesn't have to be a DMTF document. So this could be an OCP document.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess it's sort of a two-level approach, right? The first one is we have in the specification referred to the fact that redfish definitions are being worked on, right? And also points to general redfish information. I think with regards to this white paper, this can be updated in parallel as it sort of comes along.
Right.
Now, obviously, I'm not a subject matter expert on here, so I'm going to defer to Mike based on his availability and when he thinks it makes sense to sort of put this together and have it linked in the specification. But yeah, Mike, what do you think about this? And I think we may have talked about this before, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts here.
Yep, I'd be happy to take care of it. I'll have to work on it in the next few weeks and hurry up a bit. I'm actually retiring in 5 weeks, but
wow.
but I'm going to work part-time for the company just on standards. So hopefully this will be included in what they're going to pay me part-time to do. And I'll work with the PICMIG team to get them to send the mock-up and schema into Jeff through an official channel so we can get started on that.
Awesome, appreciate that. Yes. Cool. Then I guess in parallel, I guess Jacob and I will go ahead and start getting reviews done on the specification. And I think whenever this white paper is ready, we can definitely introduce a line that has a hyperlink that would take the reader to the document for further reading. Awesome. Okay. I think we're about a minute over. Are there any other items that that come to mind based on a previous discussion or today's discussion? Okay, if not, thank you all for joining the call, and we'll talk again soon. Stay safe.
We'll see you.
Okay, have a good one.
See you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep.